so there I am, and I'm seeing usually about 4 men, one after another. They would stand in the hall and wait their turn. And the thing was is that the men always, when we finished, each of them would bow and thank me and tell me they loved me.
All right, Donna. Donna, where did you grow up? Where are you from originally?
I actually was born and raised in Kansas City, Missouri, and I was born in December of 1948. And the reason I mention when I was born is because it helps place where my story, the whole context of my story. But then also, I feel like I'm 77 years old now, and I am so proud and grateful to have reached this age given everything that's been in my life.
You've been through a lot.
And when I was in my late teens, I didn't even expect to see 25. So I consider this an achievement.
What was your family like?
Well, first of all, I want to say about my family that a lot of times when people hear that I was a sex worker and struggled with drugs and was in a cult for 32 years and all that, they want to know, well, what was wrong with her family? And I want people to know very definitely that my family definitely was, my parents raised me right, as the saying goes, and they did everything they could to instill a good moral compass and also to be a hard worker. And they were very focused on me getting a good education. I went through high school in 3 years instead of 4. And so I take total responsibility for everything that I did after I left home. It's all on me. It has no reflection on my family. And my father was, he was raised on a small dairy farm in Kansas. And he had a genetic disorder called Marfan syndrome. And it's something that affects your bones and your eyes and your heart, but it does not affect your intelligence or your drive or your willpower or anything. And during the Second World War, he was a supervisor at a war plant, and he got glowing recommendations afterwards. And but then all of the auto plants in Kansas City, he'd go and they'd hire him. Then they'd give him the physical, and they'd say no, and they'd hire him and say, we can't have you falling dead on the factory floor. So when I was little, it was very hard for my father to earn a good living. And my mother was born and raised in and around Kansas City also. And she was from a very poor family in the Depression and kind of an abusive family. And my mom worked very hard right along with my father. And I think a lot of times she was kind of overwhelmed and depressed with 5 children. And when I was first born, we were living in a transient permanent hotel in a very poor section of Kansas City, and we were a family of 5. And then after my little brother was born when I was 4, a family of 6 living in a tiny 2-room apartment with the bathroom down the hall. And my mom was a very dutiful mom, and at night she used to read us these stories, the bedtime stories, and about heroic people doing good deeds. And from as early as I can remember, I always wanted to be a good person and do good things for the world. And when I was little, I thought, well, how do you even find out what kind of thing you can do? And when I was in grade school, I developed an interest in theater. And I thought maybe I can contribute something to the world as an actor, singer, dancer. And that's what I wanted. Now, my father believed that we should never expect anything to be just handed to us on a silver platter, and we should work for everything we got. And so any classes I or my brothers wanted, we should earn the money ourselves. And he also felt like, well, if you earn the money, then you will work harder at it. So I did things like rake leaves, and I sold Hallmark cards door to door. And at the age of 12, I started babysitting. I babysat so much, and that was how I paid for all my dance classes. And the thing that was unusual about me is that where I started noticing I didn't seem to be quite the same as other girls, even though I was always very feminine looking. You know, there was nothing that would give you any tip that I was struggling with my sexuality. And I started feeling like I'm more interested in the other girls, especially tomboyish girlfriends, than I am in boys. And when I was but in Kansas City back then in the 50s and 60s, nobody was talking about lesbianism. And if they were, certainly not in front of the children. And so I didn't even know that there was such a thing or it was a possibility. And I thought something was wrong with me. And like, for instance, one time my best girlfriend, who was taller and more muscular, stayed over. And I thought, I wonder what would happen if I kind of scooched over in bed and put my arms around her and tried to kiss her. And of course, I didn't do it. But I thought, do other girls ever have thoughts like this? I didn't know. And in high school, what I wanted to do was come to New York City and study acting when I graduated. But my father was adamant about that. No, he would be willing to put me through college. And by the way, the thing I forgot to say is that my parents were very enterprising, very hardworking, and they did manage to pull us up out of poverty. And by then, we were living in a very nice neighborhood in a very large house. And they could have afforded to pay for my dance lessons and other things, and also he felt about my studying acting, like, I will pay for you to go to college and major in engineering or business administration so you can always make a good living. But I'm not going to pay a cent so you can become an actress and go off somewhere and starve. If you want to do that, you're on your own. And so there I was, so young, and I did go to Missouri University for like 3/4 of a year, and I got into the theater department and was cast in things, and I did very well at that. But then also when I wasn't in that, now Missouri University was considered a party school, and it was sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And I had sex with a lot of guys, trying to prove to myself that I was straight. Of course, it didn't work. And I was hoping that maybe something would click, and it didn't. And there was this one moment when I was in college when I might have figured out who I really was, where a girlfriend and I were sitting on my bed in the dorm room, kind of like cross-legged, knee to knee, and we're looking at each other. And suddenly it was like our eyes locked, and it felt almost like a magnetic force pulling us into a kiss. But we were both in denial, and we both froze, and we were both too terrified to make the move. And so the moment passed. And after that, it never happened. We went about our business like that. But as I went along in college that year, I just felt, I can't go on with this. I can't study the things Dad wants me to study. And on the spring break, I came to New York and went to the neighborhood playhouse for an interview. And they actually were very nice and everything, but they said, look, you're just too young. We know from experience that when somebody's under 20, and also when they don't have a support system with them here, it's not going to go well, so come back later. So I went back, and it's like, I am not going to wait. I am getting out of here now. And I called my parents, and I told them I'd been accepted, and I lied in my teeth. And because I was always such a good child and well-behaved, and, they didn't expect that I was lying, and they said, okay, well, this is your decision and you're on your own. And I said, yeah, I know. I was very naive. And so I came to New York when I was still 18 in 1967, and I came with almost no money. And it was... Now, maybe what I should do, though, is go back a little bit, because I did drop out of Missouri University that year, and I moved off campus into this big Victorian house. And it was really a hippie co-op is what it was. And everybody in it smoked drugs. They smoked pot and did LSD and things like that. And here they were. I was, this straight-laced background and all this upbringing I was trying to live by. And I was kind of, whoa, they're so uninhibited and so unrestrained and everything. And it's like, but it was like, wow, this is a new way of looking at things. And meanwhile, I thought, well, I won't use drugs. And it's not, every time they would pass a joint, it's like, no, thank you. But then one night when I went out on another date with a guy he was so nice. And just like you'd think that most women would have just said, he was so cute and nice and smart and everything. But I just didn't feel anything, either romantically or sexually.
Life can be a lot sometimes, and you don't have to handle it all on your own. One thing I've learned from interviewing thousands of people is that uncertainty is something we all experience. I hear it in these interviews every day, people wondering how they got where they are, what comes next, or whether their life can be different than it is today. I've experienced periods of uncertainty myself, when I wasn't sure what direction to take or what the future would look like. Talking with a therapist helped me slow down, organize my thoughts, and gain some clarity. Sometimes you don't need answers as much as you need perspective. BetterHelp, the sponsor of today's video, makes therapy accessible wherever you are, whether online or through the app. You take a short quiz and get matched with a licensed therapist quickly. You can communicate by phone, video, or text, and if it's not the right fit, you can switch therapists at no extra cost. According to BetterHelp, 82% of clients recommend their therapist. Click the link in the description or go to betterhelp.com/softwhiteunderbelly to get 10% off your first month of therapy. Because no one should have to go through anything alone. BetterHelp is here with you. Now back to the video.
And so that night I came back to the house and they're smoking dope and they offer it to me. And I thought, what the hell, why not? And I just was so frustrated that night, like, why can't I be a real woman? Why don't I feel what I'm supposed to feel? And so I took a puff. Then I took another puff. And then it was like this wonderful feeling of serenity washed over me, this don't worry, be happy kind of feeling about my sexuality and everything else. And within a week, I was smoking pot every day. And so I arrived in New York. I was already a hippie when I got here. And I arrived pretty much with 2 suitcases and a cat and a carrying crate, and that was it. And I knew one friend in New York, a person I knew from college, and he let me stay there in his apartment until I could find a place. Now, the second day I was in New York, I went to a bank to cash some traveler's checks. And there I am looking very much like a hippie and everything. And this guy that was just a well-dressed, very, conservative-looking man in the line behind me. He strikes up a conversation, and I say that I'm looking for work, and he says, well, you look like, with your long hair and hippie look, you look like you'd be the adventurous sort that would be up for things. And I said, well, yeah. And he said, well, I know a place in the Diamond District where you could make some good money today. And I said, well, yeah, doing what? And he said, servicing the men who work there. I'm like, you mean having sex? He said, yes, but it's very safe, no danger, you wouldn't get ripped off, you wouldn't get hurt, and you should think about it. And so I said, well, I do have to think about this. So I stood off to the side after I did my transaction while he did his. And I did think about it, and I thought, like, my hippie self is saying, be free, do what you want, it's your body. And the other, like, oh, I don't know about this. But then I thought, would this really be that different from all that sex I gave away in college that meant nothing? And I really need the money. So when he came back, I said, yeah, I'll do it. So he walked me over to 47th Street, the Diamond District, and into this one particular store. And he introduces me to the owner of the store, and he left. He didn't ask for any money, never saw him again. And the owner takes me past all these glittering cases of diamonds and past all these diamond setters, hungry-eyed diamond setters that are looking at me. And he takes me into this dimly lit room in the back with this grubby green army cot ready for business. And so all the way as we're walking, I'm like, oh my God, am I really doing this? Is this really happening? Oh. And then I'm there, and the first guy comes in and he's unbuckling his belt, and I'm practically having a panic attack. And it's like, Donna, just calm down. Too late to do anything. Nothing you've not seen before or done before. So just keep your eye on the job and do it. So that's exactly what we did. And one of the things is they were also, I don't know if you oh, this is so normal, nothing unusual here, just totally matter of fact. And that helped me a lot. And also the fact that different from what I felt like I had to do with guys in college, like pretend I felt something when I didn't, no pretending. That made it a lot easier for me too. So it was 6 men, one after the other. And then when I'm leaving, I kind of come out onto Fifth Avenue, I'm blinking into the sunlight, and I'm like, oh my God, what did I just do? And I've got this debate going on inside me, justifying and accusing and back and forth. And then I reach into my purse, and there's this $200 that I just earned. And it's like, this feels really good. And it's like, just get over it. Stop all this moralizing, for Christ's sake. It's your body. You can do what you want. So I did get over it. And I also want to say, because as I'm going to, this profession didn't exactly be the best fit for me, but I do feel
roughly $35? You made roughly $35 per guy?
Something like that, yeah. And the thing is that back then, see, that was a lot more now. What $35 was back in 1968 by then was very different now. The $200 was more like close to $2,000 today.
Okay.
That's the thing. And
That's a great
so,
point.
it was a good chunk of money. After that, though, and as I was... I do feel like sex work should be legalized, and that just like I feel that a woman's choice, that women and men should be allowed to make this decision for themselves about whether to go into sex work. And I feel there are so many people that this is the only path that they can take, and there are some people who actually want to be in the industry, and that is their perfect right, and I respect people and I support them. And so I want to make that very clear at this point and throughout as I go on. And so after this, I felt like I don't ever want to do this ever again. And so I'm trying so hard to find legitimate work, and all of it paid so little, like being a wait staff or working in a store and stuff. And it's like, it would take me forever to get to acting school. I'll have to work so hard around the clock just to pay for my living expenses. And I did do things like nude modeling at the School of Visual Arts and other art schools. And I did do some modeling, most of it nude, for photographers and other artists, but there just wasn't enough of it, and it didn't pay, it just wasn't enough. And there was, my low point really was when I took a job. There used to be these peep shows around Times Square, really scuzzy places, and where a man would come in with his camera, which may or may not have had film in it, and choose a girl, and we would pose inside this little cubicle, and he'd take photos and through the glass, and also the girl could have paid sex in the back. That was an option. But the place, the stench of it, and just the people and everything, it made my skin crawl. And also I felt like I want to use my body to create art through dance and things. And this is a desecration. So I only lasted a few days, and I just couldn't take it. So I'm still on the hunt for what to do. And an opportunity to make a softcore porn film comes up. And I thought, well, I might as well try it. It pays a little bit better than a lot of other things. And back then, softcore porn was pretty much like what you'd see on a lot of cable channels nowadays. So I'm on the set, and they're changing the scenery or doing whatever. And I'm sitting next to a woman that I call Michaela. And we start talking, and she tells me that she's actually a call girl, and she's just making this film because she needs something every year to put on her taxes as a legitimate income. And so I said, so you don't want to be an actress? Hell no. She says, this kind of shit pays so much better than this, and much quicker and faster and easier. And then she kind of looks at me and she says, you look like a smart girl. Maybe you'd be interested in doing this too. And I'm like, no, I want to be an actress. And she's, well, it really is just a form of acting, because you just become whoever your client wants you to be, that persona. And it's actually very good training. And she starts telling me how lucrative it is, and it's not demeaning or dangerous or anything. And it's a smart choice for savvy girls to get ahead, when they need money, and that I really should consider it. And I imagine there are some women in the life that are hearing that right now and saying, yeah, sister, that's true. A savvy choice for smart girls. That is what it is sometimes for some people. So I didn't realize, though, that I was being groomed and recruited. And she was she was like, this is in your own best interest that I'm telling you all of this. And she knew exactly what I needed to hear. This is just how the Epstein girls got recruited, and many others, where people pretending to have their best interest at heart when they really don't. And so I went away, and she did give me her phone number and all that, and said, make an appointment, come and see my place sometime and talk about it more. So I go away, and it's like I can't get it out of my mind. And I keep thinking, the idea of me having these nudies around, pictures of me, lewd photos of me out there, and also being in porno films, this might hurt my acting career. And she also talked about, it's private, no cameras, no audience, nobody needs to know. And thought, she's got a point. So I made an appointment, and I go up, and her place was a high-rise building very near Columbus Circle. And I'm getting out of the elevator, and there was this very dapper dressed man standing almost like he's waiting to get into the elevator, and he gives me a good long look as I'm coming out, and we pass. And so I go, and she and I start talking, and a little later, that man shows up. Well, guess what? That was her pimp. Within a few hours, he was my pimp too. And that was how I got recruited. And so I call him Ronnie. I'm using fake names, of course, in all of these. And he started teaching me the tricks of the trade. And the first lesson that he gave me wasn't about sex at all. It was about race. And he said, your white skin is worth money. And Michaela is drop dead gorgeous, but everybody can see she's Latina, and so she can't go to the same places and charge as much as you can. And he told me that I would be able to go all over the Upper East Side into fancy hotels and nice condos and and where the highest paying Johns are. And the door is open, and I can charge as much as I want. And so after he's telling me, he said too that I would have my own apartment, and he'd give me a list of men to start calling. Everything would be very high end and good. I would never work the street. He really explained everything, and it seemed good to me. And then he says, but we start in Chinatown. That's where I turn out all of my new girls to the life like you. And I'm like, wait a minute, Chinatown. He's telling me about all these fancy places I'm getting. And so I said, well, why Chinatown? And he said, because I can train you while keeping you safe. That no matter how green you are, you can tell the difference between a Chinese client and a white cop. And so you won't get arrested, you won't get beaten up, because the Chinese guys are very gentle. They're not violent. They're just lonely men separated from their wives and children back home. And so before you know it, I'm climbing these stairwells and these really rundown apartment buildings down in Chinatown, and where men often live, like 6 men to a room, and in these cramped apartments. And so there I am, and I'm seeing usually about 4 men, one after another. They would stand in the hall and wait their turn. And the thing was that the men always, when we finished, each of them would bow and thank me and tell me they loved me. And I found them quite endearing. And it was so different from the arrogant guys I'd had sex with in college. And a lot of times I told them, I love you too. And so it wasn't at all what I expected. And meanwhile, very quickly, my internship was over. And Ronnie, as promised, he got me my apartment, and he taught me how to make phone calls and how to do everything. And before you know it, I was seeing about 6 men a day, either at my place, their place, or at a nice hotel, sometimes even at people's offices, like down on Wall Street. You never know what's going on behind those walls. And meanwhile, there was a lot that I didn't want to think about. Like, I did not want to think about the wives and the girlfriends. And I felt like a traitor to the sisterhood. And as much Michaela, like, oh, we're doing them a favor, like wives don't want to have sex with, you're doing them a favor. All of this stuff, but I couldn't buy it. I just couldn't make myself feel that way. And I also didn't want to think about what I felt, because this was not the way I expected my life to be going. But I did it. And also we had a split. See, he wasn't taking all of my money. He was getting the lion's share, but I was still making much more money than I could have made at any legitimate job, because I had no skills. All I had was a marketable body. I couldn't even type. That was why it had been so hard for me to get legitimate work that paid much of anything. And then several months in, though, one day I get a call from Michaela, and she wants to come right over, and she's got something that she wants to tell me. And even though I said, well, I've got a John coming any minute, can you come later? No, I got to come now. And she comes over and she says, me and Ronnie just got married, so you're free to go. And I'm like, what? And she says, a pimp is never supposed to show favoritism, and he just did that when he married me, so now you can leave. And I didn't know anything about this, but obviously I don't think that code anymore is in operation today with all the trafficking. If anything, the absolute reverse. But back then, there really was a code, and he didn't fight back or anything. And so I just felt like, as naive as I am about just about everything, I know enough to know that sometimes it is very hard to get away from your pimp, and some women die trying. And I have just been handed a golden opportunity. And so I gave Ronnie $1,000, which again would be about close to $10,000 a day, scraped it together, and gave that to him because his dream was to own a Cadillac. And so for him to go towards buying that. And in exchange, he promised to have my back. And that if I got arrested, he would come and bail me out. If a John ever threatened to rough me up or hurt me, he would go and deal with them. And also, if another pimp tried to force me into their stable, he would also take care of that. So just the fact that I had that kind of protection, I went into business for myself. I became an independent call girl. And right away, once I was keeping every dollar I earned, before I knew it, I was making more money than I ever dreamed of. And I had enough money to start going to acting school. And so Herbert Berghoff HB Studio in the Village was where I wanted to go. And so I enrolled in a very aggressive group of classes in acting, voice and movement. And I always showed up on time, completely prepared and everything, and I worked very hard at it. And in between clients, I was learning lines and practicing songs and even rehearsing with other classmates scenes at my place. And of course, they had no idea what else I was doing in that apartment. And one day, one of the acting teachers, William Hickey, who was, he was an Oscar nominee and had, so many film and acting credits. And he was very revered. And he said, called me aside and he said, Donna, I really think that you've got a good chance of making it in the industry. And not because you're the most talented, perhaps, but because you work so hard. And sometimes being a hard worker is even more important than talent. And I just felt like, of course, I wish that he'd said, oh, you're also monumentally talented. But still, his words meant the world to me. And I just felt like with that encouragement, I'm just going to keep on. And so that's what I was doing. And I was really living my life in 3 different worlds at that point, because I would need to get away from the flesh-oriented world of sex work. And I would go down into the East Village and hang out with my hippie friends getting stoned. And of course, here we are, flower children, and we're discussing the most abstract philosophic ideas of the universe, like we could answer them. But that was the seeker in me and the flower child that was still very much alive. And so that was what I was doing. And then while I was having my own clients coming from my own list, I was also trading references with pimps. And as an independent girl, and I'd send them a guy, and they'd send me a guy, and we traded back and forth, and we would take our split 60-40. And there was this one guy, I call him Daryl, that he came one time, we're doing our split, and he happens to mention, I've got a new girl just up from Atlanta. She goes by the name Bonnie. And so I asked, so what's she like? He says, she's kind of short, light chocolate, very innocent looking. And she just turned 17, but she comes across much younger than that, more like 13. And I'm, okay, well, I didn't say anything because there was no way that I was going to work with an underage girl or even somebody who might be underage. I just refused. But then a while later, I met Bonnie, and I saw she really was very sweet and obviously very naive. And she still had this beautiful light shining in her eyes. And something in me screamed, I have got to help this girl get out of here before it's too late. Because if she stays in this work, that light is going to go out and her spirit is going to be crushed. And see, it also kind of woke me up that what I'd been normalizing, because also, I came across very young and could even sometimes pretend to be underage and, take all my makeup, like make the pimply look, and act very girlish and giggly and everything. And it's like, what have I been doing? And I should really be thinking there's something very wrong about this and doing something against it instead of normalizing it and benefiting off of it. And so I also felt like, if I tell Bonnie that she should get out of this business, well, what do I say about myself staying in it? So, because I didn't think I knew it was no good for me either. I wasn't cut out. And then, so a while later, Bonnie and I are both working the same corporate convention. And if they'll have these suites, and they'll have girls, and sometimes they'll be projecting porno on the walls, and it's quite a scene. But we're both there. And I managed to get Bonnie off into a private ladies' room. And I said to her, look, I got to talk fast and where nobody could hear. But I really I know that you got into this because you didn't think you had any other option, just like I felt. And but I know that some girls can feel like this is glamorous or fun or something, but trust me, this is going to be, after a while, it's going to start degrading your sense of the value of yourself, and it's going to suck the soul right out of you. And so please don't do this. I see you've got other possibilities for you in your life. Please don't do this. And she is looking at me like her eyes are as big as saucers. And finally she says, well, if it hadn't been for Daryl, I'd still be homeless in the bus terminal where he found me. And I said, but I've got girlfriends that you could go and stay with them while you try to figure everything out. And she said, but I've heard that really bad things can happen to a girl that tries to escape. What if Daryl finds me? And I tried to reassure her that my friends are hippies in the East Village and he'd never know to look for you there. And she kind of, well, I don't know. And so I gave her my phone number and said, well, call me anytime. And I pretty much gave up on hearing from her after a while. But then one day my phone rang, and it was Bonnie. And she said that I've been looking at Daryl's other girls, and I don't want to wind up like them. I want out. And see, that might have been my hint that felt like she's been trafficked. I didn't think about it that way back then. I didn't, it just wasn't the way I thought yet, like I do now. But I told her, you got to keep on acting normal. Don't do anything different. And I had also warned her when I talked to her, you see, that please don't tell anybody else about our conversation, because even a girl you trust, because it could get me in big trouble. And so she said she wanted out, and I said, just act normal, like nothing's happening. And so finally, we were able to get something going where, without Daryl knowing, we jumped into a cab together, and I get her down to the Lower East, to the East Village, where drop her off real quick in the apartment of my friend, and I jump back in the cab and make it back to my place to meet my next client. And so a few weeks later, or a few days later, I guess, I did go and see how Bonnie was doing, and there she was sitting on the floor next to her futon bed, and she's got this pan of boiling water with the steam coming up, not quite boiling, but steam, and she's fixing her hair. She says, I'm doing an afro. And I said, and she looked so happy and relaxed, and also with her, she looked very different with the afro too, and so she looked lovely. And so I left her there, and I knew that there was not to go near her anymore, just in case it might lead him to her or anything. But I went on, as always, I had to act normal with Daryl too, and go on trading the referrals. And I didn't know, does he know what I did? And he's just pretending, or he's acting like he doesn't know anything. And so one day he calls and he says, I've got your money for you from the most recent splits. When do you want to come and get it? And I was like, oh no, apprehensive about going up to his apartment. But if I showed any hesitation, it would look guilty. So I said, well, tonight after I get finished with all my clients, I'll come up. So that night I do go up to his apartment up in the 80s in the Upper East Side. And I walk in, and he's very just, polite and cordial, the same as always. And he gives me the money. Then he walks over to a side table, and he picks up this doubled up chain. And he starts to show what it would feel like to be hit with it. And that was when it felt like everything went into slow motion. And he's screaming, where's Bonnie? What did you do with her? I know it. No, I don't know anything. We're screaming back and forth. I have no idea how long it went on. It felt like forever. And he's swinging it closer and closer, and I can feel the air moving close to my face and everything, and I am terrified. And I felt... I was drenched in sweat and felt like I was going to vomit or have diarrhea any moment. And I probably looked like ashen white or shade of green. And I suddenly had this thought, well, maybe I can get into the bathroom and see if there's an exit out the window. So I said, I'm sick. I feel like I got to go into the ladies' room. I'm pregnant, and I took something to try to miscarry. And so, all those acting classes on improvisation were maybe serving me well in that moment. And the thing was that for some reason, it had quite an impact on Daryl. And suddenly he stops dead still, and almost like a shudder goes through him. And his face goes from this grimace to like a bewildered look, and all the tension drains from his body. And he says, okay. And so I go into the bathroom, and I'm flushing the toilet, making a lot of noise and groaning and stuff, and trying to act like, this is real. And when I finally came back out, he's just kind of sitting slumped on the couch, and the chain is down on the floor at his feet. And he just kind of looks up at me blankly. And then he gets up, and as politely as he saw me in, he sees me back out. And the thing is that I go out, and my legs were so wobbly I could hardly walk. And I make it down the elevator and past the doorman and out onto the street. And I'm just looking up, and here on Park Avenue, there's all these gorgeous trees on the median and the flowers, and the buildings are all lit up by the street lights at night. And God, it looks so gorgeous. This world I thought maybe I was never, ever gonna see again, because that crazed look in Daryl's eyes looked like he had gone insane and he was gonna kill me, just, from sheer insanity. And I walked about 55 blocks home, just drinking in every gorgeous spot in this beautiful world, and just so grateful to be alive. And frankly, after all of that, I will never know what was up with Daryl, why he let me go. But to this day, I just feel like, thank you, Daryl, for listening to your better angels and not hurting me and letting me go. And I don't feel like, this bitterness or hatred or anything, which, kind of surprises me, but that's how I feel. And so after that, though, that experience really had a profound effect on me. And I couldn't pull myself back up from it. And I did want to go on being a call girl because the money was so good, but I just felt like I hate this work more and more with every day, and I hate myself for doing it. And what have I turned into? And I thought of that little girl, I don't even think she'd recognize me. And so I just felt sick with all of that. And then I did get sick for real. And it turned out that I had tonsillitis, and I had to have my tonsils out. And I had to take off work to recuperate for a couple of weeks. And so I'm in my apartment, and I just descended into a deep depression. I turned the phone off. I didn't want to talk to anybody, just curled up in a ball under the covers, barely eating or anything. And I had to drop out of acting school after everything I'd done to get there, because I just knew that, to get in front of a whole classroom taking a critique, and that I just didn't think I would be strong enough to take it, and I might have some kind of a breakdown right there and even get banned from the school, who knows. And so I was in a very sad shape. And after a couple of weeks, I finally made it to go out of my apartment around to a park that was about 2 blocks away. And I'm sitting there, and one day I realized, I really am well enough to go back to work. And I just started to sob. And I just didn't want to do it, but I felt I had to. So I did go back to work, and and started doing even more drugs to try to cope with my misery. And now, when I was with a John, very often I would feel like I'm floating up somewhere, like where the wall meets the ceiling. I'm watching myself down there on the bed doing what I'm doing, totally dissociating, just totally feeling like that. And then one day, one of my regulars, I'll call him Bernard, comes, and see, a regular client got to pay after we did the deed instead of before. And so he makes this little joke about, well, what would you do if I didn't pay you? And so I thought, oh, I'd kill you. And I'm thinking to myself, and all in a split second, you know how fast the mind works. And I thought, let's see, do I have a butcher knife that's long enough to put it through his ribs into his heart? And how would I know where his ribs are? And he's very big. Would I be able to do it, or would he overpower me? What would I do with the body? Nah, not a good idea. And so we we have sex, and he pays me, and he leaves. And so afterwards, I'm thinking, holy shit. I just thought about murdering a man, and it seemed totally logical and reasonable. And it scared me to death. And see, also, Ronnie had had another call girl who was serving time up at Bedford Hills for having murdered John. So I knew this happened. And weirdly enough, she had used the same professional name as I did. So I thought, if I'm not careful, they'll be visiting both of us up there, because Ronnie and Michaela did go up and visit her. And so for some reason, I can't imagine why I did it, I decided to stop using birth control. I went off the pill. And I thought, I won't get pregnant. My hatred of men is so intense. Nothing from one of them can possibly live inside me. And I didn't get pregnant either, by the way. And then after that, also, as I'm continuing to take more and more drugs, that on the street, I started having like these hallucinations, not in my control, where a man would be walking towards me, and I would think maybe he was doing something obscene with his mouth or making some lewd gesture or something. He wasn't, when I get close, but I would picture myself shooting him point blank in the chest, and the look of shock and pain as he crumbled to the sidewalk. And these hallucinations also terrified me, and I didn't want them, and I wanted them to quit, but I couldn't make them stop. And so at this point, I knew, you know what? You got to get out of this life. You got to change your life, or something really, really bad is going to happen. And I felt like there's only 3 places I am heading at this point. It's going to be a mental institution, prison, or 6 feet under, where I could do something that I'm going to get myself killed or maybe other people hurt. I'm dangerous to myself and to others. And so I didn't tell anybody that I knew in the industry that I was leaving, because I didn't want anybody to try to convince me to stay, and I might weaken and stay, And also, all of my cards with all the men's phone numbers and everything, I also felt like that might be too tempting to have those. I might weaken in the future and come back into the life. So I'm tearing them up little by little, sitting on the floor next to the toilet and flushing them down the toilet. And it felt literally like I am tearing up money and flushing it down the toilet. And I could barely do it, but I kept doing until they were all gone. And then I paid one final month's rent. And I only took my personal possessions. I left fully furnished apartment right there, locked the door, and I walked away from that life forever. I'm very grateful that I did.
How many years did you do it?
Oh, it was only about a year. A lot can happen in a year. And it's just, I didn't have it in me to go longer, And it was, I packed a lot into that year, as you can see. And every day felt like I was living 5 days, you know what I mean? And
how do you explain, like, you don't seem the type to be doing that kind of work, and your family wasn't?
My family had no idea. One of the photos that I'm going to give you, and you can just see how innocent and just so normal I looked, and naive at that age. And they had no reason to think that I would be doing anything like that. And there had been no tip-off. And believe me, I kept it a secret from them. I did not want them to know anything about that, because they would have been horrified, especially my mother, who'd been brought up in a Pentecostal religion. I thought it would just about kill her if she knew.
What is your view on prostitution? Should it be legal?
I really, totally, and completely believe that prostitution should be legalized. Absolutely. And just like I believe that a woman's choice about having children should be strictly her own, that every man and woman should be able to choose for themselves. There is no reason why this should be illegal. And then you just think of the horrible exploitive things in this country and also globally that are legal for people to exploit other people. When you think of what is legal in a capitalist system, and then that a person that being their own personal entrepreneur with their own body is not. And yet they are open to exploitation of the worst kind by other people. That's just totally wrong. And I have a lot of respect for people who are in this industry. And I met some very, very nice people. And if I can just say, my pimp Ronnie was actually a very decent human being. And I feel that if he'd had some other more options in life, that it's very likely that he wouldn't have become a pimp any more than I would have become a call girl. And but you know, everybody, and especially if you're not white, everybody does not have all the advantages of everybody else. But I am passionately in favor of the legalization of sex work.
Interesting. And so after, this was at what age that you quit?
I was somewhere between 19 and 20. I was still, let's see, that was like 1968. Yeah, that I was, you know, because I was born in December of 1948, it's always hard for me to calculate everything. But I was 19 or 20 at the very most.
And what did you do with your life after 20?
Well, then what I did is I moved, you know, I was pretty much not in the greatest shape mentally and emotionally and everything. And I moved back down into the Lower East Side and with my hippie friends, and did a lot more drugs to try to quell the pain that I felt. And there was even one party where we were all, you know, everything that I just about smoked and snorted, anything that was being passed around. And I hold up this little pill and I said, the best way to die is of a drug overdose. The way I want to go out is stoned out of my mind. Cheers, you know. And so that was the mental situation I was in. And meantime, I also knew that I needed to make some changes in my life. And so I wasn't quite ready to go back to acting school, but I did think, well, I think I can audition for some plays. And pretty quickly, I got a role in Tobacco Road with a touring company. And we were playing some cities down south, a month in each one for 4 months. And so when I reached Tampa, Florida, and well, first of all, see, I was still in denial about my sexuality. And which was also partly why, you know, the sex work was so hard for me, although there's plenty of other gay women who do it. And believe me, and like just to go back, one time Ronnie took Michaela and me up to a brothel in Albany that was an all-girl lesbian brothel, you know. And so that was quite an eye-opener for me, you know, that was a stunneroo. But the thing is that all the men in the cast were gay, and they would go to gay bars at night and after our performances. And so it's like, well, I have nothing better to do, and so I'll go with them. And so one night in Tampa, a woman comes over to me and she says, see that woman over there? She's my best friend. She'd like to dance with you, but she's too shy to ask. Would you like to dance with her? And I'm like, oh, well, you know, I guess I'll say yes just to be polite. You know, but meantime, I'm like, yay! Very excited inwardly. And so I go over, and when I got close enough, let's see, what do I call her? Terry. I call her Terry. And she was had this alabaster white skin with a few freckles and these gray-green eyes and this ash blonde hair. And she was beautiful enough to be a model, but her hair is cut, you know, very, very close, and she's dressed in a very masculine manner. And so I asked her if she'd like to dance, and she leads me to the dance floor, and she's got a very, you know, masculine demeanor, and we dance and we chat. And so the rest of the evening, we really hit it off, and we're talking and talking. And when the bar closed, I went over to her place, and that night just holding each other in our arms, and we just talked and talked all night until sunrise. Then she had to go to work. But one of the things was too, oh my God, no pressure to have sex. You know, that was a new one for me, you know. And spending the night with somebody. And so maybe a few days later, we actually did have sex, and it was just like, nothing like I'd ever experienced in my life. And we spent every moment that we possibly could together. And she introduced me to her friends, her family, and to her places that she liked. And it was just this instantaneous connection. And I just felt like, oh my God, that Midwestern upbringing that kept me from finding out all these years who I actually am. Now I finally know. And what a relief, because I thought I was incapable of love. I'm a defective human being. And here I am in love for the first time in my life, and just absolutely thrilled. And so then even when I left Tampa, when other places, she would come and visit me in the other cities. And then when I came back to New York, she would come here. But the problem was, long distance relationships are hard. And also, if you both don't have a lot of money to be flying back and forth and everything. And she really didn't like New York, the constant hustle and bustle and noise. She loved Tampa. And for me to do anything in theater and pursue acting, I needed to be in New York. So it was a very difficult situation. And so I just missed her terribly. And so I, always, when something's not going right, take more drugs. And I started snorting methamphetamine. And it was even, I think it was at this point where I saw that I was beginning to even have memory lapses from that, where I would do binge and crash cycles, and where I'd stay high like days at a stretch, barely eating and not sleeping or anything. And then I would crash. And then you feel both hyper and exhausted, wired, and it's like, you're a mess. And then but all of this was just to go and do it all over again. And that was what I was doing. And one time I was even having memory losses. Like one time, so on the corner of 6th Avenue and Bleecker Street, where a woman I knew from Herbert Berghoff acting school sees me, oh, how are you doing? And everything. And we're talking. And then suddenly it's like, I don't have any idea who she is. I don't know. How did I get here? What are we doing? And she must have seen something. She says, are you okay, Donna? And I said, oh, yeah, I just realized I've got place I'm supposed to be. I got to run. And so I go, and it's just like, oh, my God. And it was very clear that I was damaging my mind, and yet I couldn't seem to get the willpower to stop. And then also I had this feeling like, what's the point of even having a mind anyway, a conscious mind, because all I do is it just watches me and criticizes me, and it makes me ask all these questions that I don't have the answer to. And it's my mind is a bother more than a help, so that's how I'm justifying it. But there I am. And then I did think that, well, I really do have to do something about myself. Now, I was not going to tell my parents. They didn't have a clue, so I was not about to tell them. And also, my hippie friends were no help, with all the drugs they were using. And also, I was shielding Terry from knowing the worst. She didn't know all of what was going on. And so I thought, well, maybe it's time for me to go back to acting school. Maybe because I think that my desire to be a true artist in the field of theater, maybe that's the best thing in me. And if I could just get the right guidance, maybe I can get my life back on the right path. And so I enrolled at HB Studio again. And so there I am again, walking in, and I'm like, oh, I hope this is good. I hope I'm ready for this. I didn't know. And the first class I enrolled in was musical comedy. And it's taught by a woman named Ann Fielding. And she was a fairly new teacher, a replacement teacher. And she had quite a few good things, on she'd been in a lot of plays, very serious things, and also she'd been in The Fantastics, The Girl in the Fantastics, a lot of things, and it seemed like a good thing. And so I go into the classroom, and right off the bat, there's this other woman who comes rushing over to me and like, "Oh, are you in this class?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Oh, this is the greatest thing that has ever happened to you." And I'm like, "Really? What's with her? The greatest thing that ever happened to me?" "Oh, please." And inside I'm kind of mocking. And she says that this class is based on the teachings of the philosophy aesthetic realism that was founded by the great poet and critic Eli Siegel. And she mentions that one of the principles is all beauty is a making one of opposites, and the making one of opposites is what we're going after in ourselves. And I'm like, wait a minute, I thought I was coming to a musical comedy class, not a class on philosophy. And so pretty soon Ann Fielding comes in, and she seemed very well grounded, very businesslike, and she starts the class and other people are performing, and then she calls on me to do my song. Now, I did Ado Annie's song from Oklahoma, "I Can't Say No," which was a pretty interesting choice. And I did it with all the showbiz glitz, all of that and everything. And then afterwards, Anne asks me, "Well, what opposites did you see?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't know." And she said, "Well, what about hidden and shown and surface and depth and the opposites that always have to be welded together in good acting, sincerity and insincerity?" And she says, "Do you feel like you have to keep your real self just for yourself and manufacture some picture of yourself for everybody else?" And I'm like, holy cow, how did she see that? That's exactly how I feel. And she asks me these questions that I felt like I was being stripped naked in front of the class. And she did it very gently and nicely, not like meanly or anything. And part of me just wanted to run out and never, ever put foot on a stage again. And then the part that was just desperate to become a better actor and a better human being was just drinking in every word. And so she says, "Would you like to do it again?" And so I said, yes, I would. And so I get up, and at first it's like, I'm pretty unsure and everything. But as I did more and she said, "Just take everything you pasted on it off and just try to see what do the lyrics mean to you personally." So I'm doing that, and I'm really beginning to make them mine, and I'm really beginning to feel it. And it just kind of like opened my voice and opened myself. And before you know it, I'm just like, the music is pouring from me. And for the first time in months, I felt this joy of performing, and it's just like I'm myself. And at the end, it was so improved that the other people applauded, and I felt like I just won an award or something, and I was very happy. And so I left the class, and I still didn't know whatever this aesthetic realism is, maybe it can really help me get my life back on track. And I'm thinking especially about my methamphetamine snorting and all. And I'm thinking, maybe it's really worth having a mind to use on this and find out. And I remember I was standing next to a blue mailbox somewhere on Bleecker Street on my way home. And I said, "You know what? I am never, ever going to use meth again." I promised myself that, and I never did. And one of the things I do want to make very clear, because eventually aesthetic realism claimed that it ended my drugs, and all. It did not. What ended my drug use was me, and that my hope, what I thought aesthetic realism was going to be, that was what did it. And also when I got closer, I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit, giving the story away a little bit. But also I saw very clearly that if they knew I was using the drugs I was using, there was no way I was going to be welcome in aesthetic realism. So there was no, they can't claim this. So I just want to make that clear. And so after that, I liked what I was learning in Ann Fielding's class. And she and Molly, as I called her assistant, the other woman, that always inviting us to these public lectures on Saturday night at a place called the Terrain Gallery on Grove Street, also in the West Village, very close to HB Studio. And so I thought, I'll go and check it out. So one Saturday I go and I'm sitting there, and all these people like march up to the stage almost in lockstep, and they sit on their stools, rigid spines, and they're reading something, and it's kind of like you couldn't even tell their voices apart, like they didn't want their personalities, God forbid, to intrude on what they were reading. And I couldn't make heads nor tails. It was very erudite, very scholarly, and about the opposites. Things like the world, art, and self explain each other. Each is the aesthetic oneness of opposites. That's one of the teachings of aesthetic realism. And I'm like, oh my God, how long is this going to go on? And I was so relieved when the intermission came. And so I go, and I'm trying to look casual, leaning against the counter there. And also, see, I thought this was going to be a bunch of people in the arts. And so I'm dressed in this kind of like geometric, psychedelic-looking jumpsuit. And everybody else here, the women are in these demure little dresses, and the men in jackets and ties. And I looked more like I might be in a cult than any of them did. And I'm embarrassed about that, but I'm looking around and I'm so anxious about myself and about what my future holds and everything. And I'm looking, and they look like they've got it together, and they know exactly what they're doing with their lives, and they look so comfortable and good and everything. And I just look and I say, I want some of that. And it wasn't anything I heard on the program. It was strictly that brought me back again and again. And so the next week I went again, and this time I dressed more like they did, so I'd fit in. And then a couple came over, and they're like, oh, we saw you last week, and good to see you again. And they introduced themselves, and they said, we know it can be kind of hard to understand everything to begin with, and we can, if you'd like to go out for a coffee or drink afterwards, and we'll answer, anything, we can talk about everything. And so they're befriending me, and then the next week also, there they are again, and now they start introducing me to other people, and see, I didn't know, but I was just I was being love bombed. Cult recruitment 101. And you start giving the flattery, and everybody is befriending you. You've suddenly got a whole new group of people that want to be your friends, all of that. And inviting me out, and even to go to gallery, anything, just really all sorts of socializing. And they would hang on my every word and answer every question. And I was taking notes like crazy, what they were saying, because I really wanted to learn something. And also the flattery and telling me, like, see, that one of the things they always had on the program, the only reason aesthetic realism isn't known worldwide is because people in the press and media can't bear the fact that they see the founder, Eli Siegel, is so great that their puny little egos can't stand it, so they boycott it. So this is what they're always talking about. And the fact that here I was wise enough to see past everything and think for myself and recognize a good thing when I saw it. And all kinds of different flattery and everything. So I kept coming to the programs, and then I wasn't sure, I'd look around and I'd see people, it's like, well, she looks like she could be gay. And, he looks kind of, but nobody's saying anything. And then I find out everybody here's straight, that, kind of thing. And, well, if they say so, And then I wanted to find out without actually telling them, just like I hadn't told them about the drugs. I didn't say, I'm deeply in love and I've got a girlfriend, because I didn't know yet, and this is the late 60s, and there was a lot of prejudice, and maybe even in New York, who knows. And I just felt like if they're against me being gay, then this isn't for me. So I float a question, kind of vague, and the person tells me, what Eli Siegel said is, you can have sex with an elephant as long as you have goodwill. Now, obviously, that was hyperbole, and I interpreted it as meaning that he believes that it's not important who you have sex with, it's whether you really care for them and have goodwill for them and respect them. That's the important thing. And so I thought, okay, well, that looks promising. So I keep coming. And meantime, I get a call from Terry. And she says, Donna, I think we have to end this right now, because before we even go any further, because the long distance thing just isn't going to work for me. And I have to have somebody I can wake up next to every day and go and do things. And so I tried everything I could say to convince her otherwise, but she wasn't moving. And so that was the end. And I was heartbroken. I cried for a solid week. And then I thought, you know what? Since she's lost to me permanently, I'm going to throw myself into the arms of aesthetic realism. And that's exactly what I did. And now one of the things about what makes people vulnerable to cults is that where you're at a flex point, you know, some kind of a dip. And a lot of times it is like a breakup or a loss of a loved one, that they died, or maybe you came to a new city, you don't know anybody, or you got the job of your dreams and you feel unfulfilled. You know, there's these moments. Well, here was exactly, I'm the poster child for after a breakup. And so I take out what was called a study form to become a student directly with the founder, Eli Siegel. And what that entailed is that I wrote that I believed Eli Siegel was the greatest human being who ever lived. Aesthetic realism was the knowledge that all humanity had been waiting for, and that it would be my privilege to spend the rest of my life working to have them known to the world. And I literally pledged my life to aesthetic realism. And so little did I know that I had just joined a cult, and what was worse, it was an anti-gay cult. In a couple of years, it was going to be gaining fame for being a conversion therapy program all its own. So there I was. So I start studying with Eli Siegel, and right away, what I hadn't expected was how it was going to so totally and completely take over my life, that was what was required. And literally everything in our life had to revolve around it and be a benefit to it. And for instance, if a person wanted to get a college degree or anything, well, no. Unless it's going to be a benefit to us that we can brag about. We have a PhD, you know, or something like that. Otherwise, it's taking your time and attention away from aesthetic realism, even like having babies, you know, no, you know, too much time and attention. And the thing was that the first thing for me that had to go, see everything a backseat or had to go from your life altogether, was my acting career. And after I had sold my body and practically my soul to get to acting school, they started like pushing me away from that direction. And it's like, I got a role in Stop the World I Want to Get Off, and God forbid I missed a couple of classes to go perform. And it's like, you don't think Eli Siegel actually let you become a student just to be running off to perform in movies, in plays, do you? And even like the Saturday matinees, and then other things that I would try for. It's like, well, an advertisement like, well, that company makes napalm. You wouldn't want to take a paycheck from a company that makes napalm, would you? You know, always something. And also what I didn't really understand at first, but began to see that the way aesthetic realism and cults in general, but aesthetic realism worked. You think of an octopus with Eli Siegel the head and the students all like, you know, out there are the tentacles. And when they say the student body, that's exactly what it is, like that, where all the different parts working together for the same purpose. And when it was decided by Eli Siegel, or the student body, thinking that was what he intended, that it would all like close ranks and work together in tandem to force that thing on you. And by the way, in aesthetic realism, there was never any such thing as innocent until proven guilty. It was all guilty until proven innocent. And they started accusing me like, look, do you think that there's something in you that wants to be famous in theater so you can make yourself more important than Eli Siegel? And even asking me, saying, what do you think is a better use of your time as a new student to be really concentrating on this or gallivanting off and doing other things? And also the real kicker was, well, what do you think is really the sign of a life well lived? To have some success in theater, or having been on the ground floor of the most important body of knowledge that ever came to this world. And see, how do you argue with these things? They were past masters at these leading questions that made you give the answer they wanted. And it also gave them plausible deniability. That, well, we didn't tell her what to do. We just helped her make a decision independently for herself. And so that was how it all worked. And they were just starting, with my theater. But then I began to see who we lived with, where we lived, and what job we took. I mean, literally everything was controlled by aesthetic realism. And see, when I said some of the principles, like that principle, all beauty is the making one of opposites, and the making one of opposites is what we're going after in ourselves. There's nothing wrong with that. And I taught dance for many years using it, and I still think it's a beautiful principle. But what makes a cult is the way it runs your life. And it takes its principles and uses them to trap you and force you to do what it wants you to do. And so that was what was happening with me. And I did feel like, I was greatly distressed to give up my acting theater. I didn't do it willingly, but, I was told other people did. And we have the Aesthetic Realism Acting Company that you can join and use your talents to, if you get good enough, to show the beauty of Eli Siegel and Aesthetic Realism just in this little acting company. That's what you could do. The benefit of it, what I said, everything was supposed to be to benefit it. So one of the other things that immediately began happening with me as in cults were separating me from my family. And now, see, my family was good about aesthetic realism, as we called it, that they supported me, and they didn't really know all that much about it, but they were more supportive, and they didn't say anything bad. And then, but I was allowed to write to them and talk to them on the phone, but they had moved to Texas by then. After I came to New York, they lived in Houston, but I wasn't allowed to go home and actually see them. And what I was told is that, again, it was about that you can't miss classes and you've got important work to do here, and it would give them the message that they're more important to you than aesthetic realism. So I hadn't been home to see my family for 6 years when my father needed open heart surgery. And the thing is that Eli Siegel knew that if I went, it's like anytime you were with your family, it might lessen his power over you, and it would call back to your pre-aesthetic realism true self. So I did not ask permission this time, because the reason it had been 6 years is because other times I'd been denied. So I simply, shaky voice and everything, but I declared that I'm going. So I did go, and they said, well, just make sure you get back as fast as possible. So I go to Houston and my father for his open heart surgery, because the cardiologist wasn't sure he was going to make it. And so he came out and he looked out of that surgery, and he looked more dead than alive. And my mom and I are living at the hospital just about. And then when the doctors did think that he was going to be okay, he was going to make it, and long before he was in any condition to be released from the hospital or anything, that I had to hustle right back to New York City and get busy again. And so my father had a very long and very difficult recovery. And he was so used to being a man of action and doing so much stuff. And here he is, he's in pain a lot, and he can't even eat things he likes. He used to love to read, and he just, even that, lost all enjoyment. And mom had to keep working, and the one child still at home is off at school, and he's lonely and bored, and we would talk on the phone, and he would beg me, please come home for a real visit, stay, and we'll pay for all the expenses, please just come. And it just ripped my heart out to hear my strong father just pleading, and in that state. And the thing was, is that I knew from what had happened to other people, that if I let anybody know that my father was pleading for me to come and how much I was just yearning to go and be with him, that it was possible that Eli Siegel would say, well, he's trying to entice you away from aesthetic realism using his medical situation. So you've got to cut him out of your life altogether. That had happened to other people, that people cut out their parents. And so I didn't dare tell it. And then the worst thing about it is that finally I just couldn't even bear to talk to my father and not be doing the right thing. And so I stopped calling him altogether. And so it's just like, and he eventually got well, and I went on with my life. But meantime, this is one of the biggest regrets that I will carry with me to my grave. And see, this is what aesthetic realism did in general and what cults do, that one of the reasons that I got into aesthetic realism is that I felt like I've already got enough regrets in my life. I'm looking for something that's going to help me live my life in such a way that I will not be adding to them, but this is just one of many, but it was just terrible. Now, I think maybe the place I'd like to go next, that here I am getting into aesthetic realism, and I still didn't know about the gay thing, really, and cults are very good at making it seem like what you think you need. And the thing is that also, I so much had wanted aesthetic realism to be the thing that was going to fix up my life that I was riding right past a lot of red flags, listening to clanging bells, and just ignoring them because my need was so great. And also that their manipulation of people's psyches was so adroit. And so at the beginning, like when I heard that there are some men who changed, including Ann Fielding's husband. He was supposed to have been the first man who changed from homosexuality through sessions with Eli Siegel in 1946. But I thought, they couldn't possibly been gay the way I'm gay. Maybe they were just experimenting and had some bad experiences. Who knows? And then also, I didn't hear anybody talking about lesbians, and especially not about changing. And I was very glad about that because I just feel I have no desire whatsoever to change. I mean, other than society's condemnation, I think this is one of the bright and shining spots in my life, And so little by little, though, it became clearer that Eli Siegel saw that same-sex love, be it you male or female, is all based on contempt for the difference of the world as represented by the opposite sex. And that same-sex love was not really love. It was just really self-love masquerading as love for another person. And that to be a really good person, we needed to oppose our contempt, including in this field. And I needed to really crush this thing and get rid of this thing, and I needed to change. And I so much wanted to be a good person that I did go along with it, and there were even times where with their manipulation and my desire to be a good person, as I said, I really almost, kind of convinced myself, I think maybe I've changed. And meantime, of course, I hadn't. And I would have gay dreams sometimes, and even walking through the village, sometimes I'd see women, it's like, oh my God, look at her, masculine looking woman, whoa, But, and then whenever I would try to tell another aesthetic realist, well, I think maybe my change is a little shaky, it's like, well, you're just being ungrateful to Eli Siegel for the magnificent life he's given you, and you should just cut it out, so there I was. And so this all was in 1969 that all of this began. That's when I got into aesthetic realism. But then in 1971, aesthetic realism went national through the David Susskind show. And he invited 4 men in aesthetic realism who had supposedly changed from homosexuality to be on the show with 4 men from the Gay Liberation Front who said change is impossible. And so this show was broadcast in 40 states to 32 million viewers. And men were flocking to aesthetic realism, hoping that it could change them. Because, as you know, back then, being gay could get you killed, fired from job, even put in a mental institution, all sorts of stuff. And so the thing is that, we had some interest in doing good for them, but really the main thing is we thought that their changing was going to catapult Eli Siegel and aesthetic realism into national fame, and we'll have it known to the world. That was what we were interested in. And so he created a consultation trio that he called Consultation with three of the men to give the counseling sessions to men. And it was basically the leading questions, and they'd keep asking and asking till they got the answer they wanted. And it was all one size fits all, no exceptions. And they would manipulate many men into thinking, saying they changed. And there's how many of them were just saying they changed. It's all over the map, and there's no documentation of what was actually the truth. And their claim that it changed people permanently and completely, there is no evidence for that whatsoever. But so then in 1973, 2 years after Consultation with Eli Siegel decides that he wants a women's trio to teach lesbian women to change. And guess what? He appoints me. So there I am. And basically, back then, I was thought that being a consultant was just like the greatest thing in the world. You've really made it. And I was stupid. I don't even know what the word is, but I was elated, unfortunately. But so here I am talking to women who are gay, and I'm leaning across the table, the consultation table, the 3 of us, looking into their faces and telling them that what they are is not acceptable and it needs to change. And I can't even begin to say how much remorse I have for that now, that I did this to other women. And this was a case of the victim becoming the victimizer. And that's what cults do to you in general, where you're the enforcer on other people. And this is one of the things that if I could go back, or even now, that any woman that I could ever apologize to, that I gave consultations to, or came to the seminars we gave, or that read the things that I wrote, I would so gladly do that. Now, I went on like all of this, and I rose in the organization. I was not only a consultant, I became a full-time staff member, working 60-hour weeks at least for poverty wages and everything. And so in 1996, Eli Siegel's successor decided that we all needed to become the press ourselves and write articles and opinion pieces that have aesthetic realism known. And you see, Eli Siegel himself, he took his own life in 1978. And so he'd appointed this successor who was, he knew would carry on everything exactly as he'd founded it, and she was even harsher than he was in certain ways. But she decided that this was what we needed to do, and we should blanket the country with our articles. And now I was already, had been for ages part of the propaganda system, doing all the editing and writing and ghostwriting and everything else with aesthetic realism. So I started writing articles, and I decided that I wanted to write about the aesthetic realism explanation to racism, which it claimed it had the definitive answer, that racism was based on contempt for the difference of the world, you see in another person of a different race. And all that was needed is that for people to see that the way to really respect themselves and feel good about themselves is through respect for other people. Easy peasy, And so back in 1998, there was what really was a modern day lynching in East Texas. A man named James Byrd Jr., 3 white supremacists dragged his body 3 miles behind their pickup truck to his death. And the whole country was pretty much in an uproar about that. And the first time when I heard about that, I thought, oh my God, aesthetic realism's explanation of how to end racism is so namby-pamby. Like it's like waving a hanky to stop a Mack truck. And see, I had been very upset about a lot of things about how aesthetic realism operated a lot, and the treatment of me and how I was forced to treat others that I didn't like and everything. But this was the first time that I felt the teachings of aesthetic realism are inadequate. They're not as powerful and good and capable of changing the world as I thought. And that was what I based my whole life, my idea of who I am in this world on, was my belief in the teachings of aesthetic realism. And so while that moment, and it was like a moment and it was small, but it's kind of like, those first rumblings that are almost imperceptible of a huge earthquake that's going to strike. Well, that was it, that was going to bring my whole life tumbling down around me and me standing there in the rubble trying to put it back together. And then a year later, everybody's heard Amadou Diallo, an African immigrant in the Bronx who was shot down in a hail of 41 bullets by 4 undercover police officers. And again, it was just horrible. And the whole country, it was kind of like the George Floyd's hub, what happened there, where everybody was very distressed. And I felt like by then I was writing a lot of articles and being published in a lot of black newspapers. And I felt like, just as a decent human being, I have to write something about this. And especially, how do I even deserve for black people to be reading what I write? If something as important as this, I'm going to keep my damn mouth shut. And so the leader, it was forbidden for us to write anything or say anything or do anything that was critical of the police. And so I asked for a special permission to do it, because it was like the lead off of all the news programs. It was top of the page in newspapers. Well, not only was I told that I couldn't do it, but how dare I even ask? So I joined Al Sharpton's National Action Network, and I started sneaking out and doing things, and it's like, well, if I can't write anything, I'm darn well going to do something. And I took to the street and mobilized, and then I even ended up creating 2 pen names, because I could only write about aesthetic realism under my own name. And I wrote about other things that really mattered to me. And so, though, at that point, and that other things that were happening, I just thought, this is so totally wrong. How can I go on living like this, where I am not allowed to live by my own moral compass and doing what I know is right and knowing what's right, that somebody else has the right to tell me this? And I thought, I have got to get out of this. And so one of the thing is that was not so easy. And one of the things that I haven't spoken about is that in the midst of all of this, I did actually, in my 40s, marry a man. And another aesthetic realist, of course, and because Eli Siegel had to be the central person we loved, and that the reason we loved the other person is that they loved him too as much as we did. But I did honestly and sincerely love my husband, and it was not a matter of sexual conversion. It was what's called sexual fluidity, because I still was not sexually attracted or romantically to men. It was that I was in love with this one very specific individual who happened to be in a male body, that all his human traits that didn't really matter, was gender neutral, you might say. So the thing is that by then having worked at the headquarters for about 19 years for poverty wages, that I didn't have, like, how am I going to even support myself? And it's like, I have no money, and I've been so cut off from all people, and I don't have a college degree, and if I leave aesthetic realism, what will I put on my resume? There won't even be anything to put on my resume, and they certainly won't give me a reference. And how will I live? Where will I live? What will I eat? And I thought, I'll be homeless. I'll be eating out of street corner trash receptacles. I was terrified. And also, it was so hard to think of walking away from my husband. And we reached an impasse because he would not leave for me. I would not stay for him. We both begged each other, but we just couldn't. And he was truly devoted and he wanted to stay, so I had to walk away. And so that was what I did. And it was actually, I left on September 7th, 2001, like 4 days before the terrorist attack, and where the World Trade Center came down. And then guess what? Few 100,000 people also looking for work, And you also think, just by chance, thank goodness I hadn't planned to leave aesthetic realism 1 week later, because I probably wouldn't have had the courage to do it. And so I did go home and see my family, and they were just lovely. Took me right back in, and I'll never forget the look of my mom when my sister and brother picked me up. I had to take the bus, and everything. No, it was a 48-hour trip to Houston. But my mom running and us throwing our arms around each other, and it's just like, oh my goodness, it was just so, they were great. And no recriminations or anything. I'd only been home 4 times in 32 years, and it was all related to illness or death in the family. But back in New York, I called up a person, Kenton Kirby was his name, just a wonderful person, a managing editor of a newspaper, Caribbean Life, one of the newspapers that had always ran my articles while I was in aesthetic realism, and we become friends. And so I told him that I've left aesthetic realism. I have totally disavowed it, and just wanted you to know that. And he said, come and work for us. And he gave me a job. He created a position covering the New York City Council. And that led to me getting other jobs. Like I went to work for first 2 different council members consecutively, and then I moved on from that, working for the city, other municipal jobs, and I retired with a good pension and everything else, and I'm a proud retiree of the union DC 37, and so that put food on my table and a roof over my head, and it also gave me a chance to do the work that really satisfied my soul. And one of the things that I started doing immediately was volunteering at the Holy Apostles Soup Kitchen. It's in Chelsea, and it's it's the largest soup kitchen, and now it's soup kitchen and food pantry since COVID in New York, and one of the biggest in the nations. And I'm still volunteering there to this day. And one of the things that is so great about it, and I'm also the church warden, by the way, everything has gone that direction. And but one of the things that's so great about Holy Apostles that I know I can get up out of my bed every day, and there's something I can do there that I can use my life to help other people. And even like I'm in charge of the garden and doing the gardening, that making it beautiful for the guests of the soup kitchen and food pantry, and as they stand at the fence next to the garden, and other people in the neighborhood and other people walking by, just giving beauty that will bring joy to people. That brings me joy. That's one of the things. And then one of the things is too that there's this trash container right there on the corner of 28th and 9th Avenue. And every time I walk by, I just think, thank God I am not looking at that trash can, wondering if there's something in it I can eat. That I know that just right over there, I'm going to be helping feed other people. And it's just such a great feeling. And I just feel like I have a wonderful life, and I'm so grateful, that I've come through everything and I'm living the life that I want to have. And I feel like it's the best period of my life. And also in 2018, I started doing the thing that I had felt that I needed to do when I got out of aesthetic realism, that I needed to tell my story in order to help other people do better with their own life. And meantime, it was very hard, to write a memoir because I had to revisit everything mentally and emotionally and literally re-traumatize myself in order to tell the story. But the book it's pretty much finished, and a while ago, I started bit by bit telling my story on Substack, writing it, and also I'm doing reels on Instagram. As of this morning, people are very interested in my reels, and got quite a following there, which I was shocked because I thought maybe I'll have 200 people. Today I had like 110,000. It's just like amazing to me. How did this happen? And the thing is there I'm sitting. This is one of the shirts I wore in one of my reels. And
what is your Instagram?
I just sit.
What is your Instagram?
It's Donna Lamb 330.
There you go.
And that people see me sitting there in my 77-year-old face and body, and I'm talking about my experience being a call girl. And a lot of people, it's like, whoa, I didn't expect that. And people, lots and lots of comments, and I read them. And one of the things that just moves me so deeply is I get comments and private messages from people who either were in the sex industry or are currently sex workers. And I'm just so deeply moved by the things that they write to me. And one of the things that so many people say is they say how much they like it and they like that I'm doing this and please continue. And people say that seeing me doing this makes them feel so much less lonely. And that just means the world to me. And I just can't say enough how happy I am. And I got so much help after I got out of aesthetic realism from friends and acquaintances, but also just by total strangers, doing kind things, large and small, which I was told in aesthetic realism, we're the greatest, kindest, most enlightened people here. Nobody will care about you out there. But it's just amazing, all of the good that's come to me. And one of the reasons I'm here today is I just hope that through being on this channel, then I can give back to people some of the good that's come to me.
It's wonderful. What a great story. Thank you so much, Donna.
Well, it's been my pleasure for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Even though Soft White Underbelly consists of a lot of videos, it's really still a photography project to me. And if you appreciate the photography, sometimes it's difficult to enjoy it when it's scrolling down the screen, which is the only option I had in this horizontal format on YouTube. So last year we came out with the first Soft White Underbelly book, which is a collection of the best portraits from the thousands of interviews I've done. Each portrait in this book is accompanied by an interesting quote from the person's interview.
Oh my God.
There's more.
Wow. These aren't as bad as I thought. I look like a witch.
The book includes multi-page spreads of both Rebecca and the Whitaker family. I will not be reprinting this book when it sells out, so once it's gone for good. You can order yours at softwhiteunderbelly.org. $125, $150 for a signed copy. And thank you for watching.